My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life, I wore two simple gold rings on my finger. They were not the most expensive rings in the world. They were not covered in diamonds, but they were priceless to me because they were my wedding rings. My husband placed them on my finger when we were both young and full of hope. We didn't have much money back then, but we had love, real love, the kind that grows quietly and holds you through storms. So those rings were more than jewelry. They were home. They were memory. They were a promise I carried with me every day. Years passed. My husband grew old, and then, one day, he was gone. But the rings stayed with me. I would sometimes hold them and whisper to the space beside me, remembering his hands, his voice, his laughter. They made me feel like I was still a wife, not just a lonely widow. One winter, I had to go to the hospital for surgery. The doctors said it was routine. They said I would be sedated for a few hours and then wake up safely. My children came to visit me before the operation. They helped me change into the hospital gown, and because jewelry isn't allowed during surgery, a nurse gently asked me to remove my rings. I hesitated. Those rings had never left my finger except for cleaning. They felt like part of me. But I carefully slid them off and handed them to my children for safekeeping. "Please don't lose them," I said softly. "Of course not, Mom," they answered. Those were the last words I remembered before everything faded into sleep. When I woke, the room felt different. My body felt heavy and weak. My mind was foggy like I had been asleep for 100 years. A nurse approached me and smiled. "How are you feeling, Miss Thompson?" she asked. I froze. Miss Thompson? That was my maiden name, a name I haven't used since I was a very young bride. "Oh," she said lightly, "that's just what was on the file." But that small moment felt like a crack inside my chest, as if somehow my marriage had been erased. Hours later, when my children finally came back into the room, I looked down at my hand. Bare. Empty. No rings. "Where are my wedding rings?" I asked gently. They didn't look at me. There was a silence so loud it almost rang in my ears. Finally, my eldest spoke. "Mom, you don't need them anymore. We sold them." The world fell quiet. I thought I had misheard. "You what?" I whispered. "You were sedated, and honestly, Mom, you don't really remember things well anymore. You won't need rings where you're going. We're arranging long-term care for you." My heart cracked. They had sold the last part of the love of my life, the last thing my husband ever gave me. And to make it worse, they had changed my name in the hospital records back to the girl I used to be before my marriage, as if my entire life with him never existed. I felt small, invisible, unloved. But there is something my children forgot. They forgot that age does not erase memory, and pain does not erase strength. When I recovered enough, I requested copies of every hospital document, every receipt, every note. I found proof that my name was intentionally changed, and I learned that the rings had been sold for far less than they were worth, quickly, quietly, without my consent. I spoke to a lawyer. I spoke to social services, and slowly the truth began to peel back like old wallpaper. My rings were traced, recovered, returned, and legally my name was restored. Mrs. Williams, my husband's wife, forever. But something else happened too. I learned that sometimes the deepest pain does not come from strangers. It comes from the people you once trusted the most. Today, I do not wear the rings every day. Instead, I keep them in a small velvet box next to my bed, not because I am afraid of losing them, but because I know now that love does not live in a ring. It lives in the heart, in memory, in the life two people build together. So if you are listening to my story right now, and you have ever been made to feel like your life, your love, or your past no longer matters, please remember this. Names can be changed on paper, rings can be stolen, but love, real love, cannot be erased, and neither can you.